And okay, so now we're live.
Okay.
All right, so thanks everyone for coming tonight. Our speaker tonight is Curt Tilmes, if I pronounced your last name correctly. We a couple guys at work, and I stumbled upon Curt's work because we were pretty interested in seeing what GraphQL has to offer and looking to get a proof of concept ready. And we hadn't seen anything written in Perl just yet. There are a lot of different implementations of GraphQL that cover a lot of different languages, but Curt's was the first one that we came across, and we were very surprised to see it was actually in Perl 6 and not Perl 5. So that was pretty neat to see. I think recently there was another Perl 5 one that just came out, but I think yours is a lot more complete at this point. So so yeah, we were very excited to see what you have to offer, and so we're very excited to have you present on your work today. So Curt is an employee of NASA actually for the last, I think you said 23, 25 years, and has been using Perl on the job for quite a long time now. So we were talking about using Perl on the job, and is interesting to hear him say how, you know, it's been fun using Perl 5, but it's exciting to also see what's new with Perl 6 and kind of add some new flavor to the job and see what's new in the Perl community. So so thanks again, Curt, for joining us. And if you want to give us a little more background about your job, I think some of us would be interested in hearing about that. But really appreciate you taking the time to join us remotely, and the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. I actually, when I learned about GraphQL, I had been a long-time Perl 5 user, and I was like, you know, it's available in all these languages, why not Perl 5? And I was looking into, you know, what it would take to do GraphQL, and reading the specification, they have a very complete, detailed grammar. And I was thinking about how to implement that. And about that time, I was reading more and more about Perl 6, trying to learn about that. And I'm like, Perl 6 has grammars built into it. And I said, well, can I make a grammar that can parse the GraphQL language as described in the specification using Perl 6? And I started working, it was pretty much a cut and paste from the specification into Perl 6. And boom, there's my grammar. And, you know, I kind of got excited with that, and then started building some objects. And I'm like, oh, well, when it parses this, I can, you know, build a little Perl 6 object. And this was my first Perl 6 project, and I kind of taught myself Perl 6 as I was developing the GraphQL module for it. But I'll go into a little bit more. So this introduction, some people are probably familiar with GraphQL. It was originally developed by Facebook. When Facebook initially decided to move to the mobile domain, they had a lot of interactive kind of client-server connections to share their Facebook information with their various clients and web services, etc. And they're like, oh, well, we'll just, you know, access these same web servers that we're distributing all our Facebook information from our mobile, and boom, we're done, you know, easy peasy. Facebook mobile app was a disaster, performance was awful, everyone complained. And they said, we have to rethink the way that we interact between clients and servers, with mobile specifically, mainly because of the low latency. And a lot of client-server applications that have grown up over the years have gotten fast internet, where you send some queries to the server, you get data back, you send some more queries, you get some more data back. And if anyone has kind of worked with REST, which is kind of the state of the art for client-server applications, the very first implementation of REST, you're like, wow, this is great. I send an identifier and I get back a data structure. This is perfect. This is exactly what I want to see. And then as you work on your REST application, you start adding features. It's like, well, but we need these other fields added in there And the first applications that you rolled out don't really need those extra fields, but you add them in anyway for the later applications. And then what leads into the GraphQL, the graph part of it, is when and you get back a list of something, and then for each one of those, you need to send another identifier to get another data structure back. And most people who evolve a REST server over time end up building into their REST servers a graph capability, because you say, well, allow a couple extra parameters to my REST server. Instead of sending me back this list of identifiers, I'll just go ahead and send you all the data structures, and you start building these nested data structures and coming back. And before you know it, you've built a more complex server than the simple REST that you started with. Send an identifier, get a data structure back, and you end up moving towards a GraphQL. As they developed their version of this, trying to decrease the latency and increase the targeted information that comes back from the GraphQL server for each request over a low latency mobile network, they said, well, let's standardize the way that we do that. And that is what became the GraphQL standard. Widely used within Facebook, growing in popularity. Definitely, if I whet your interest, go and check out. There's a ton of information available at graphql.org, including the specification, lots of tutorials. Most of the tutorial information is on JavaScript, which is the reference implementation by Facebook. But everything that you read on those pages about the JavaScript implementation also works in Perl. So, maybe the syntax is slightly different, the way you express it, but pretty much everything that is available in the GraphQL standard is implemented in the Perl version. So there exist implementations of GraphQL in a wide variety of languages, as we mentioned. And the Perl 6 is recently added, and there is definitely a team now that is working on a Perl 5 version too, and I wish them all the best. Perl 6, I think, has some unique capabilities that make it very easy to develop GraphQL for that, including the grammars that are kind of built into Perl 6, and the introspection, which I'll get into a little bit later as we develop schemas. You can look into your classes and programmatically describe it. So whereas the JavaScript or the Python version, you kind of describe your schema and then you develop all your objects to match that schema. In Perl, it's just one operation. You develop your objects and the schema falls out naturally from your object. A lot of people are migrating from RESTful APIs to GraphQL. Some things I think REST does really, really well and should stay with REST. But a lot of things, specifically when you move to graph-oriented data structures, where you have relationships between the objects, where you're kind of constructing your data in a graph, and the person querying it needs to kind of walk through that graph. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean with that. But you get one object, and that object has relationships to other objects, and GraphQL makes it really easy to kind of build the nested data structure to kind of walk your graph for you. And what many RESTful APIs end up doing multiple queries. You can kind of describe exactly the type of data that you want down to the individual fields in a single GraphQL query with a single round trip, kind of maximize your data bandwidth utilization over a low latency network, and everything just works great. I'll also note, I put a link here. GitHub has recently rolled out their GraphQL API to augment their existing RESTful API. And if you go to this page on the link here, they kind of discuss, well, why did we do GraphQL? What's different about GraphQL from REST? specifically when interacting with GitHub, and you may find that interesting to read. So I'll start with the basic computer language. We always start with hello world. The Perl 6 hello world program, and I've defined a single class called query, and query is kind of a standard name for your top level root object. So that if you read about the JavaScript or the Python or whatever, everyone uses that name query as the top level. And then within that, I have a single method hello. And this basic structure where you have objects or classes or types at one level, and then within each of those you have fields or methods. You'll see different implementations use different words, but there's always this two-level hierarchy in your schema where you've got the objects or classes or types at the top level, methods or attributes or properties or whatever you want to call them at the second level down. And when you want to go to other objects, you basically have one of these methods return a link into another top level object, but everything ends up in this two level. So I have query here and then hello. And the first thing is constructing an object called query as a single field called hello. And then I'm constructing a GraphQL : schema from that query, and I pass the type object into that. So I only pass one query in there. And now I'm asking the schema to execute a query. And my query is this little string between the quotes, squiggle, hello, squiggle, which says, take the default object, which is called query, and execute the field within it called hello, and give me what it returns. And then I do my to-JSON to chunk it up into JSON. And what comes back is, so the GraphQL language itself almost looks like JSON, squiggle, hello, squiggle, but it's not exactly JSON. If you think about the hello, where it says, quote, hello, quote is the key, and then a colon and a value. In the JSON data structure, if you leave all the keys and remove all the values, that's kind of the language. It's just the keys without the values. So it doesn't validate as JSON. It's not JSON. It's a string with its own specific grammar, but it kind of mirrors the JSON that you want to get back. So I want to get it back a chunk with a single key called hello and the string hello world back. So I pass it in and execute it. So works fine as a hello world, but what you really want is a server off on your remote network, and you want to be able to have a GraphQL client interact with that. So what we're going to do is wrap that string with the GraphQL query into a chunk of JSON. I'm going to pass it to the GraphQL server, and it's going to send me back a JSON. To transform my hello world program into a real GraphQL server, I can add two lines here. One, I'm going to include this GraphQL : server object or class in here. And I'm going to pass my schema that I've constructed into the GraphQL server subroutine. And what it does is deploys a Balador server. Balador is a re-implementation of the Perl 5 Dancer module. If you're familiar with Dancer, or even Catalyst or Modalicious, they're all kind of frameworks for deploying web servers. I just use Balador because it was in use. There's a Perl module for it. It's real easy. You say, take my path /GraphQL and say, if someone posts a chunk of JSON to /GraphQL, I'm going to pull my GraphQL query out of it, execute it using my GraphQL schema, take the response that comes back, turn it into JSON, and send it back to the user. The Bailador does that for me. And then I've done one more thing, is I put a path into Bailador and said, if someone sends a HTTP GET request to the /GraphQL route, I'm going to return the Facebook graphical, it's spelled GRAPHIQL, graphical, IDE. And a lot of the, like the Python and Ruby and those, this graphical IDE, it's kind of a JavaScript IDE that runs on your client side. And it looks sort of like this next page here. I'm not sure how fast you're seeing my page flips. But so it kind of gives you an interactive IDE. And I actually have it up in another screen here. So you can type in your query over here, and it will let you pop up. If you do control space, it pops up whatever methods are available to, and it'll do kind of type ahead for you. There's a documentation explorer here where I can say what is the query type has which fields, and it has a field called hello, and you can kind of explore your schema using that. So with adding one line to your program, you get that graphical IDE for free. It actually downloads it from a content delivery network that offers their JavaScript chunk, and here it's just a few lines of code that it'll pull down that IDE. And because GraphQL language is itself introspective, it offers queries that you can explore the entire schema. What he does is ask GraphQL server, tell me all your top level objects, tell me all your fields within each of those objects, tell me all the types of everything. And it can construct this documentation browser and the type ahead IDE for you using that. So here's kind of a complicated diagram of the, kind of the way that I think of a GraphQL. We've got the schema in the middle. So we're going to construct a schema that describes our GraphQL server. And the three things on the left are what comes from the client. You have a query document, string that was, squiggle, hello, striggle, that's my query document. The operation name, which defaults to query, so we didn't provide it in that case. And variables, which I'll get into later, you can parameterize your queries. You can reuse queries by just changing a couple variables. You don't have to redevelop a whole document. You can use an already validated document and simply alter it with a few variables. And I have an example of that later on too. Schema can validate your query document, and it can call the execution with a given query document. And then I have this little introspection loop back where you can not execute like a call to hello. You can just say, tell me about hello, and it'll say, oh, well, hello, takes these parameters and it returns a type of string. And then the execution resolution subroutines for each of your fields of each of your objects. And we only had one in the little hello example, which just returned that single string. So there's just one resolver. But basically, there's a resolver each of those two levels. So the object field is my two levels, and each field has a resolver. So defining the schema, and if I'm going too fast, questions, whatever.
Sounds good.
Okay, it's hard to get feedback when I can't see people's faces. There's like, the serious faces. Let me know. So there's three ways to develop a schema using the Perl 6 version of GraphQL. And really, this came about because of the order that I developed the thing in. The first thing I do is build all the objects, kind of this manual style. And then I'm looking at the JavaScript and the Python, and it's like some of them have a special language that you can describe your schema. And I'm like, oh, well, we've got a great grammar in Perl. Why don't I parse that language? So that's a separate language from the GraphQL query language. GraphQL schema language is a whole nother grammar. And then my favorite, which is the Perl 6 class intersection. I said, why do we need to do this the ugly way that the other languages are doing it, where you have to describe your schema using a special way? Why don't I just build my Perl 6 classes and let the software itself build the schema for me? And that's what I kind of showed with the hello example. But I'm going to walk through these three styles. And really, it doesn't matter which one of these you use, and you can mix, match all you want. You can, if it's awkward to build them as a Perl 6 class, you can just plug in some GraphQL schema language to describe it, or even build the objects manually if that's easier. It all ends up the same, when the schema is done and it's executing, it's a set of Perl classes. Intermix them all you want. So the first way is to build individual Perl classes, and you call the new method, which is the Perl 6 constructor for a class. So I'm going to make a GraphQL : schema object, and I'm going to pass it in single object, but you can pass it in as many objects as you want here. And my object has a name of query. Every object has to have a name. And within an object, you can have fields. And in this object, I have a single field in my field list, and I call my constructor to a GraphQL : field object. And again, I give it a name. My name is hello. And GraphQL is strongly statically typed, so every single field of every single object has to have a type. And they have a small set of types that are useful enough to do everything that you want to do. And you can kind of define your own types to get a little fancier too. But I have a type here called GraphQL : string, and $GraphQL string is instance of that class that you can just pass in as your type. And then for every field within every object, that two-level object field, you've got a resolver. So what this says, if someone calls the hello field of the query object, call this resolver. And this is a really simple one. It doesn't have parameters. It doesn't talk to any other objects. It just takes the string hello world and returns it. So that's kind of the simplest object that you can construct with a single field, which is of type string, and named hello, and it returns this thing. So if you construct it with kind of this manual creation, you have to pass in a subroutine to be the resolver for that. I had a string object, a string type there. GraphQL itself defines a lot of other types, integer, floats, booleans, etc. And you can have a list, and a list is a list of other types, a string or a list of objects or a list of ints. Non-null just says it can't be null. Enumerated types, unions, inputs. These are very similar. If you read the documentation at graphql.org with the JavaScript or the Python or the Ruby or whatever, the types on the left are the way they're going to refer to them, and then the type on the right there is the Perl class that I have implemented that object with. So the manually constructing with objects is one thing. This language called the GraphQL schema language lets describe your objects. And if you look at the constructor to schema here, I'm passing in a single string that says type query. Within the squiggles behind query are the fields of that object. And GraphQL schema language calls it a type, but it's really the same as a class or the same as an object. The type or class or object are all the same thing. It's called query, and then it has a single field, and the field is called hello, and it has the type string. So that one little line of schema language describes the exact same object as on the previous page. And just like the previous page, I had to pass in the resolver, I also have to pass in the resolver here, always that two-level hierarchy, the type or the object or the class at the top level, and then the field at the second level down called hello, and then a chunk of code, a subroutine that gets called when someone queries that object. So again, this is exactly the same schema gets constructed with this chunk of code as that previous page. But you can build much more complicated schemas than this single string here. You can actually pass in a file name to the schema constructor, and it'll, you know, whole schema from there. You know, when I was the way I was doing it. And I know you can't read this chart here, the GraphQL schema language cheat sheet, developed by somebody whose name is on there. This describes the language in detail, all the types, the scalar type, objects, interfaces, unions. All of this is implemented. You can, you know, cut and paste any example on this page. You can, you know, read the documentation at graphql.org. The exact same schemas that other languages work will also work to describe a schema with Perl 6. So if you're, you know, say, porting something from one another, or you want compatibility with another one, it can make sense to develop your schema in kind of a language independent way. To Perl, it's not tied to Python, it's not tied to Ruby. You just have an independent schema that you develop as its own file, and you can share it around. You see on the left here, it may be difficult to read on your screen there, but there's a type user that has a whole bunch of fields: ID, string, name, age, etc. So that's the second way to construct the schema.
Is there anything that you haven't implemented in the GraphQL specification?
Sure, go ahead.
Is there anything you currently have not implemented in the GraphQL specification for Perl 6? Can you understand me okay?
I can't make out what you're saying.
Try and turn off the video. How about now? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you better now, yes.
Okay. Is there anything in the GraphQL spec that you have not yet implemented in Perl 6?
Is there anything in GraphQL not yet implemented in Perl 6? The subscriptions, there's a kind of a publish subscribe thing.
Yeah.
Developing it wasn't even part of this, but some of the people were playing around with that. I have not the publish subscribe yet. You can kind of open a connection to a GraphQL server thing chunks of I don't know much about that implemented. Okay. Pretty much everything else is there. Some of the validation is not where incorrect grammar, mine gives like an error and says it didn't parse. Whereas what I really wanted to do is say, well, on line 6, you should have had a, you know, a squiggle there and you didn't. And some of the validation is not, if you write correct, it will work. So it's almost all there. Maybe there's some little corners that I've missed, but you know, I pretty much went through the specification, and every single example on that page I dumped into my test suite, and then I developed code until it worked. So pretty much all there.
Sounds good.
The first method is building those Perl classes manually. The second method is passing in that string with your schema. The third way, and my favorite way now that I've implemented it, is Perl introspection. So you've got your Perl class you implement directly in Perl, and I
That wasn't supposed to happen.
You have that unmuted, right?
Yeah, my phone is on mute. I was just trying to give him another video angle to see the audience. There's so many of you. I had to
I just
really widen it out.
wondered if it was feeding back to him or something.
No, I did turn on the video. Oh, he's back now. Good.
Yeah.
There we go. Curt, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you dropped for a second. I don't know if you noticed that, but you're back now, so that's good.
Let me see if I can.
Are you still there? Can you hear us?
Doing the wrong.
Curt, can you hear us? I don't know if this is coming through. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to share the screen and it's not.
Okay. Gotcha.
You see that? Okay. So I'm not sure where I dropped out, but you have to declare every single argument to every single method and its type, and you have to declare the type of every single return from every single subroutine. So if you don't want to do that, that's okay. Just build your schema and pass in a set of resolvers, which are, just.
Gotcha. We can hear you just fine, but we do not see your screen right now. Looks like he's rejoining. Oh, it was neat to see at one point we had 5 viewers on the stream. I think one was my phone. One may have been Curt. So right now we have 3, so that could be 1 additional viewer. One thing I'm not familiar with is the YouTube live comments. I don't know if there's any. I did see 1 live comment. Someone was saying, one thing I'm not familiar with is the YouTube live comment. Aha. I started watching the live video. It's a bad idea. But hey, we got Nick Logan watching, and also somebody named Mission Failed said Perl 6 is the bestest. Woot! Which I agreed. So good.
Okay, off again.
Hey, there we go. Curt's back. All right, Curt. So we can hear you okay, but we can't see your screen right now. I don't know if you're trying to share your screen.
Okay.
There we go. Now we can see your screen. Let me just shut this off.
Okay. So you have to define all your types. That's including the returns. That's important. Here, I'm going to try to walk through quickly, but I've also uploaded this to GitHub so you can download it and check it out later at your leisure.
Very cool. Thanks.
If you want to construct the GraphQL server, what do you need to do? First step think about your data. Maybe it's already in an SQL database or no SQL, whatever. You're going to find each chunk of data, each of your objects, each of your methods. And second, define the schema. And one of the three methods that I've described here for every type of object, what are their fields, and what's the type of every field? If they take arguments, what are the types of the arguments? Each type of query, what's the calling signature? So I have a really simple example here. Make fun of it because there's a lot of things that I'm not doing very elegantly here. I'm trying to simplify things, but I have three types: author, tag, distribution. I say each distribution can have an author, 0 more tags. Each author can have one or more distributions. A tag can have one or more distributions. So it gives me a graph.
Oh, we can't hear you, Curt. Can you hear us? Yeah, we can't hear you, Curt. Can you hear us? Our viewer count is dropping. Oh, they're so disappointed. Hey, Curt, can you hear us? Looks like he's reconnecting. Anyone have any Perl jokes? I don't know any Perl jokes.
So we use this Google products at work.
So Netflix can like tell you, hey, you have poor bandwidth problems, right? Isn't there like a does it tell you the quality of the connection? Low. I feel like it's not a problem on our side.
Ask your live viewers.
Was it?
Ask your live viewers. Streaming.
Hey viewers, chime in. How's the quality? Hey Curt, can you hear us? I'm gonna say no because he's not connected. Well, I think we're having difficulties. Well, one thing I could do, I suppose, is bring up Curt's website. Oh yeah, Milwaukee Perl monitors. A fresh update. All right, so let's just have a look at Curt's website. So if you go to his website, you'll see he recently posted a link to his slides, so we can see everything going on here. I don't really think I can handle taking over for him. He does have an example module. I think this is right about, yeah, he was going to start talking about the example with authors, distributions, and tags. Enhance. Redis async. So he must be using Redis as the backend store for the service. As a model, distributions, authors, tags, S members. So $R is a Redis async object. And then S members. Is anyone familiar with Redis?
Set members.
Set members, okay. Is set as in like a group of elements, okay. And then an author. So is he storing within Redis a JSON structure for each data point? Distributions and tag distributions. Then he fleshes out what the distribution consists of. And I mean, and this could be similar to like a Perl distribution. Author. And then he fleshes out the author object. Next with, what is that doing?
That basically says find the next closest matching method in the class hierarchy and invoke that with given arguments.
Oh, very cool.
And that pipe D is kind of like a splat operator. So what it'll do is, like, if it's an array, it will populate the positional arguments with the array members. If it's a hash,
really?
it'll populate the keyboard arguments.
Oh, wow. And then class tag. And here we have the main GraphQL query class. Just make sure he's not joining. Okay. Interesting. So it looks like this is mostly for fetching data. I don't know if I see anything in here for setting data. Have we talked about that at all?
Well, this is for defining the schema. So what is the class query?
Sorry, what is?
Yes, what is class? Because aside from class query, this is defining the schema essentially you have to work with, right? So what is the query class for the server?
Yeah, so this is where it takes the above class definitions for the different objects and puts it into a GraphQL specification. So then this is what actually is implementing the GraphQL definition. So we take those classes defined above and turn those into the GraphQL spec so that you can actually query against these different methods.
I'm wondering if, you mentioned before it has a graph structure. So because tags are returning an array of tag, I'm wondering if it knows to kind of reach out into the tag objects so you can write queries against the internals of the tag as well.
Yeah, because that's one of the fascinating things to me about GraphQL is that the client is really in charge of what the version of your API really is, because the client is the one that's always sending like this is what I want to see return. And when you let the client do that, only when the client decides to change their definition of how they want the data returned, that's when the actual version changes. So you're kind of empowering them to version control their own API. And there's really only one endpoint. It's just /GraphQL typically, and everyone just hits the same endpoints over and over. The definition of how they want to receive the data is in their control. And what I've read is that you typically don't even need to version GraphQL in any way. It's a very additive process. So if you want to make some new fields, you're just adding that. If you want to, for example, rename something, we just leave the old stuff there, add something new, and then let the client consume the newly named fields. So you really don't need to deprecate old versions until way in the future. It sounds like Facebook has hundreds, if not thousands, of versions of their, quote unquote versions, because they're just always adding new stuff to their GraphQL specification.
How long has GraphQL been out? Like a year or two, or?
Well, it sounded like closer to 4 years.
4 years.
Because that's about when they started their mobile application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm just wondering, like, it sounds really cool, but I was wondering if.
It seemed like about 2 years ago they released it publicly, but they've been using it internally. Okay.
In development system.
Yeah.
Because it sounds so like nice, but I'm just wondering if like in another 5 years they're like running up into problems that they hadn't anticipated. But who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
So as far as the Pro 6 side, can you scroll back down to the bottom to the tags inside the query class?
List all the tags.
So that your method tags inside the query. So you're querying for tags with the method tags. Returns an array of tag objects, right? So returns array tag, that's like, that's not referencing anything, that's giving you like a generator for that return object, right? Is that what I'm not familiar with Perl 6. So with that returns array, that's just giving you type information of what that.
Yeah, I think that's just your prototype definition there.
So that had the method there, then it's structured the same way. You give the prototype. I expect this method to return something of type array containing type tag. But then inside the method, it uses the same structure with the constructor.
So array is it's parameterized type, so you can give it a parameter of what the element type is supposed to be. So when I say array tag, it's actually creating a new type, which happens to be an array of tag. So array tag is the type. So when I say returns array tag, I am creating, I'm adding this type specification of the method. But if I say array tag, that's a type I can instantiate within the method.
Okay.
Objects everywhere.
Hello?
Oh, cool.
I may have gotten back on.
Yeah, hi Curt. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I heard you talking about it. It sounds like you've got the hang of what I'm doing.
Yeah. Glad you could make it back. I don't know if it's bandwidth issues on our side or your side, but things sound good now. So if you want to continue where you left off, that'd be great.
Sure. Where are we?
Well, right where you are. Slide 34 looks fine. So we were just kind of
defining some types.
Yeah,
I've got a type.
Go ahead.
And these are, if you think of GraphQL as flat, it's a graph structure. But when you describe your schema, it's flat. You always have classes and then methods, or types and fields. If you think of, read some of the GraphQL documentation, I'll call it, type and then field. It's the same thing as a class and a method. So each one of these fields that I'm defining in the Perl 6 class is a method in Perl language, but it's a field in GraphQL language. So I've got 3 top-level objects distribution author tag, and then a whole bunch of fields. List won't show up. Got my constructors that I pass in the keys that can construct that object. And I won't go into some of the little Perl 6 niceties that can kind of take a data structure and flatten it into pairs and load that JSON data structure out of my Redis database and load it right into my fields. But when I call the constructor for distribution or author or tag, it's going to load that chunk of data out of Redis and build my class. And then I have extra methods for the classes to do the links between. From a distribution, I can find an author object. From a distribution, I can get an array of tag objects. From an author, I can get an array of distributions and so on. Finally, my top level query type is called query, and I've added 6 methods here. Author distribution tag, take an argument that is the object tag that basically just calls the constructor of that class using the specific key that I've used in my. And then I have 3 methods that return lists of authors, distributions, or tags. And the GraphQL language, they call it a list. In Perl 6, we call it array. And then every array must be parameterized with the type that is an array of in order for the introspection to describe it correctly in GraphQL. Finally, I'm going to construct my schema by passing these types, author, distribution, and tag, as well as my top-level query object. I'm going to pass those into my schema constructor, and it's going to build my GraphQL schema. And then I'm going to deploy that server, that Velador web server framework that takes the route of /GraphQL, so I can post the chunk of JSON to it, and it'll return my thing back. Finally, a query. Still with me?
Yep.
Yeah, sounding good. Thanks.
Okay. So I have the query here. I'm going to, if you don't specify the name of a query, as I don't in this thing, those little top-level squiggles say use my query object. I'm going to access the method field, the field author or the method author within it. I'm passing it my argument in there, and it's going to return an object. And anytime you return an object, you need another set of squiggles that say what fields you want within that object. So for the field returns an author, I'm going to get back a single field within it, which is the author underscore ID. That is not an object. It's a scalar, so I don't need another set of squiggles behind it. So what comes back is a chunk of JSON that mirrors exactly what I've described in my query. So I get author colon and then object, which is a chunk of JSON. Within there, all the fields that I've asked for. So I asked for author ID, I get back a single field called author ID. And of course, this is boring. Why would I ask for the author ID if I'm providing that as an argument? So let's ask for the distributions that correspond to the author. And because distributions returns an array of objects, well, for each one of those objects, I want to know I have to give it another set of squiggles and then the field within that object, that distribution object. So within the distribution object, I want the name. So I'm going to get back, because distributions method of the author object, which is what gets returned by the author method, returns an array of distributions. I get back an array in JSON. And within the array of JSON, I get back hashes with precisely the fields within them that I've asked for. So I asked for the name of each distribution. So I get the name field for each distribution in my response. If I want to Other fields, I can just add them in there as well. I can say name, also give me the URL and the stars. And what comes back is JSON that corresponds exactly to what I've asked for. It gives me the name for each distribution. It gives me the name and the URL. I can even follow it in deeper. So from the authorized distributions, from the distributions, I can ask for the tags that correspond to a given distribution. Because tag is an array of objects, I need another set of squiggles, and I need to say, well, which methods do you want for that tag object? Well, tell me the tag. And here's what comes back. The JSON mirrors exactly the query. So I still get my author and distributions at the top level, and then within tags, and tags as an array, within that array, I get a hash with exactly the fields that I've asked for. And I asked for a single field here, which was called tag. And tag is a string which returns the string GraphQL. So you can see the queries can get deeper and deeper. And because my graph is actually circular, right? I can ask a tag for the distributions that correspond to it. You can start recursing and getting deeper and deeper and deeper in here. It can get complicated as you reuse sets of tags. I can pull out a chunk of tags and describe them as a fragment, and the entire thing, including the document at the top that I had previously, and this new thing, fragment, says I'm going to ask for something called name_tags for the type distribution. And within the type distribution, I'm going to want the name and then the tags, and for each tag, I want the string tag within it. And then up above, I can refer to that fragment. So you can imagine within a complicated query, you might have sets of fields or even nested fields that you want to reuse. And by describing it as a fragment like this, I can kind of plug in. This makes it easier to construct a complex document with reusable chunks within it. I can also parameterize the query itself. So here, it's exactly the same query as I had before, but I've named it, for one thing, I've named it query, which is the default, but I've provided a parameter to the query, which is a string called $tag. And I've said use that $tag string within the query, as I've done here. And then down below, I've provided, remember in the very beginning, I said you pass 3 things into the GraphQL server. 1 is the document, which is this blue thing. 2 is the name of the query, and that defaults to query, so we don't have to pass that in if you don't want to. Third thing is variables. So variables are always written in JSON, and they describe any variables that you want to plug into the document. And what this allows you to do is kind of debug and refine your document, this GraphQL query very precisely, and then don't touch it. You just store it statically, and you pass into it specific variables when I'm constructing my web page, and I'm going to construct it for Fred, and later I'm going to construct it for Mary. I can use the exact same query and then plug in those variables to find the actual data that gets returned without trying to construct the details of this query. You can actually, and Facebook does this, is you parse out the whole query, run it through your validation, give it a tag, and store it in a database. And if someone gives you that same tag again, you don't need to parse it again. You don't need to do any validation. You can just execute that document that's already been parsed. So it's very good to reuse documents, and parameterize it with variables is a good way to do that. And of course, here's what gets returned is the JSON that corresponds to the query. and then for each tag, I've got the distributions. And in this example, I passed in the tag HTTP. So what you see on the right are the names of the distributions that correspond to the tag HTTP. One other really nice thing about Perl, so I'm using my Perl 6 introspection on my classes to construct my GraphQL schema. GraphQL schema language, way to attach descriptions to each class and each field. Also does Perl. Perl has pod. We use pod to describe, to embed documentation within our Perl. If you're familiar with doing that under Perl 5, Perl 6 has extra syntax within pod, and specifically this hash with a vertical bar allows you to attach pod documentation specifically to a variable within your program. So I attach this top line, a specific distribution Perl 6 module, to my class distribution. Within that, I have my method and my attribute, which really gets turned into a method called name, and I attach my pod documentation, name of the distribution. Well, my GraphQL schema constructor, when it examines this Perl 6 class to schema, it pulls out all the pod and plugs that in as the description. So when I go to my GraphQL, my IDE, it knows the description for each field and each class. It can pull that right out. Another nice feature of Perl 6 that we take advantage of. So I'm starting to wrap up here. We've GraphQL differs from REST and some other mechanisms for client server in that it's real easy to add these types, add fields to your GraphQL server, and it doesn't affect any query that currently works. So if someone asks for 3 fields and you add a 4th field, that's fine. The queries that ask for those 3 fields that they previously asked for get exactly the same data that they did before. For REST, if I say, well, I'm going to get this identifier and I'm going to send back a hash to these 3 fields. If I want to add that 4th field, well, the previous person who used to get 3 fields, now they're going to get my extra field. That's not a problem with GraphQL because you explicitly ask for every single field that you want to get back. It's real easy to expand and maintain perfect backward compatibility of the interface. And Facebook talks about this. The same thing they deployed like a decade ago still works. Those same queries that they had in their initial release still work, even though they've made changes constantly. You can also mark specific fields if you want to as deprecated, and with the schema introspection, a client will note that those fields are deprecated. But you can keep the query working as long as you want to. You can delete it when you feel that it's been deprecated long enough that the clients are all updated, et cetera. So it has that capability. The query can be validated against the schema prior to execution. And I mentioned this before. You can hash the parsed validated query. And that's actually a really good idea because for a complicated query, it can be slow to parse the entire thing and validate the whole thing. So I have a little example in the documentation about how to kind of hash that parsed validated query and reuse it. Using variables to parameterize a query, so you're using the exact same query, make that caching more valuable. So if you have a query that is requesting information about a specific user, that's not easy to cache as a query that is parameterized with a variable, and it is looking up a generic user, but you're passing in a variable specific user that you want to get information. So that's a good way to do it. I mentioned publish, subscribe. I don't have anything about publish, subscribe in the Perl version at all. It's supposed to be coming soon in the specification, but as far as I know, it's not been standardized. It's not in the official release yet. But I'm looking for people to kind of start prototyping GraphQL, and everything's on GitHub, and push pull requests are welcome, and I'd love to get other people developing on it too. So I see no reason we shouldn't be able to add publish, subscribe into the Perl version. On the client side, people who are consuming GraphQL servers, GraphQL is going like gangbusters, and JavaScript libraries are adding in support for GraphQL, including client-side validation of the query and caching. Because the client side can download my schema, can introspect that schema and say, well, what are the valid queries? They can actually do some client-side validation and caching of those queries to make sure that what gets sent up to the server is gonna go through. So I think that makes it even more valuable for people who are distributing data to have GraphQL servers, because it's becoming so easy to incorporate GraphQL clients into web browsing stuff. Implementation is still in development. I've developed a handful of little servers. I have a pretty expensive one that I'm working on for some NASA data, but again, it's still in development. I think that the Perl 6 object introspection is pretty straightforward. So I can't imagine the interface is going to change a whole lot, but let me know what you like, what you don't like. Take a look at the code. If there's any, changes, I'm more than happy to talk to other people who are interested in this. I know the grammar could use a little more error checking here and there. I'd love to get some hands to help me with that. Try it out. If I whet your appetite for GraphQL in general, go and out graphql.org, including there's videos of YouTube about how to develop a server for, in JavaScript or Ruby or Python. Almost everything that you can learn from those translates perfectly to Perl 6. So learning and reading the tutorial information at graphql.org, you will learn exactly how to use the Perl 6 version as well. Go and check out my little website, graphql.tilmes.org. That's just a link into the GitHub site that distributes the module. And that's it. I've got some other little demos and stuff. I could answer some questions. You can go wherever you want.
Excellent. Thanks so much for presenting. I don't know if there's any questions in the group here right now.
Sorry about those dropouts. I hope we got some coherency eventually.
Yeah, no, it was very minor. I don't think we had much problem at all keeping in touch with what you were presenting on. So thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. One other thing I would mention also is there is a podcast called something along the lines of GraphQL that I subscribed to recently. So if you have time to listen to that, that's a good resource. What else?
And see if I'm. I deployed my little server here. No, it seems to. Never mind.
Oh. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other well-known GraphQL implementations. I know Shopify. They're a big user of GraphQL. I know they contributed some modules as well. I think as far as, didn't they do some of the pub sub stuff? And I can't remember what they provided, but they were a big user of GraphQL. It's just neat to see other people offering their APIs and GraphQL and this catching on.
It was really when I go through some of the JavaScript or other ways of constructing a GraphQL server, I'm astounded at how much easier it is to just kind of plug some classes and methods in Perl 6. It takes a little getting used to, but once you know the Perl 6 way to construct an object and declare your types of every single argument and every return value, it becomes so easy to deploy your little server. And I put a link to the I put a link to the GitHub for the example that I walked through, so you can download that and take a look at that in more detail. But seriously, when I decided to play around with this, I kind of threw that together very, very quickly. It was as an example. I didn't want to do a live demo where I live code because I tend to mess myself up. It's actually extremely straightforward to build your classes and handles. And if you kind of iterate and add one object at a time and one method at a time, it's really easy to construct a GraphQL server. And if you do the way I did in this example, I've got the model object is all my interactions with my database, and then the classes are that, and all they do is call the model objects. It's real easy to separate your concern, test your model independently from your GraphQL server. Together a prototype is very quick and easy.
Good deal. Any other questions from the group here? Good deal. All right. Well, Curt, thanks so much for taking the time to present tonight. We really appreciate it. If you guys haven't noticed, Curt is an accepted presenter at YAPC, which is now known as the Perl Conference this year, which will be in Washington, D.C. this year, next month. So if you're heading out there, be sure to check him out and introduce yourself and say thanks for his work. Yeah, appreciate everyone joining tonight. I hope to do this again next month and keep you guys on a regular rotation. So thanks for coming. And this will be, of course, on the YouTube channel to check it out if you missed it. Or I'm sorry, if you want to watch it again. So, all right. Thanks so much, Curt. Appreciate it. Should we clap?
Thanks for having me. It's fun. And at the YAPC talk, I'm going to do, the Perl conference talk, I'm going to have some of the similar background information, but walk through a totally different example and maybe get into a couple of the different aspects of GraphQL. So if you're able to make that, if I kind of whet your appetite here, that should be.
Excellent. Good to hear. Very cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Thanks, Curt.
Good night.